Here's the short version. TLDW, you shouldn't buy this video card. It's fine. The thermals are fine. The acoustics are fine. But as for why you shouldn't buy it, it's $1,270. That's 27% more than the $1,000 MSRP of the 5080, which this is. But this is a Zotac 5080 solid. It's really heavy. I guess that's where the 27% more comes from. But it's also one of the first Zotac cards we've looked at in a while. We looked at Zotac a lot back in the day. So we did the 900 series, the 10 series, I think there was a 20 series one, and one of the last Zotac cards that I remember looking at, we did the teardown and the MOSFETs weren't touching the thermal pads. So that was good. That was, they were like 100+ degrees. This one's better. The MOSFETs touch the thermal pads now. So technically, this is the OC model of the solid. You can tell because they stuck a sticker on the box that says OC. Now, OC, in the context of a video card that's just sold and branded as OC, what it really means is the clocks are elevated out of the box. That is true for this. And in fact, its performance is about 5% better at sort of the best versus the NVIDIA Founders Edition 5080. So that's pretty interesting. That is on the higher side of what would historically be known as a pre-overclock. It's really just stock clocks that are elevated. But there are two main models of the Zotac 5080. There's the Extreme Infinity, which is better because it's both extreme and infinite, unlike the supply. Did you see what I did? And then there's the solid, which is what we're reviewing. And the marketing's pretty amusing for both the Extreme Infinity and the solid, to gaming and beyond. Infinity Mirror, Spectra ARGB, Ice Storm 3.0, Firestorm, overclocking utility, and quote, up to 9 composite heat pipes, because that sounds better than giving a hard number and explaining that the 5090 and the 5080 and the solid and the extreme may have differences, so we'll just say up to. It even has a, quote, card length heatsink. That's good. I'm not sure what else would be the length of the card. I guess you could just have like a PCB sticking out of the end or maybe a backplate or something, but card length heatsink, good. Now, despite its price, we're still gonna look at the thing. It was fun testing it. I think my table's too low. And we are going to be benchmarking it for, yes, it was too low. My apologies, that is completely unacceptable and doesn't meet our quality standards. We're gonna test for thermals, acoustics, and we'll do a teardown as well. Let's get into it. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly's Aeronaut and Hydronaut thermal pastes. Aeronaut is Thermal Grizzly's entry-level thermal solution, marketed as resistant to curing and for long-term endurance. Hydronaut is Thermal Grizzly's next step up, targeted for overclocking and higher performance applications. We've used Hydronaut on a lot of our systems internally over the years. You can learn more at the link in the description below. Now, if the flex of the raising table with a button wasn't enough to convince you that this video is interesting, we're gonna take this card apart today. Zotac has had a number of cards we've looked at, like I said, over the years. This one is far better than the past ones we've looked at. They genuinely have improved. Overall, it's okay. Now, one of the challenges we have right now is because this is the first partner model 5080 we're looking at, we don't really have the means yet to compare it against other partner models. So the best we could do is compare it against two things. One is, does it meet a baseline required quality? So it's looking for things like, do the pads contact the MOSFETs? They do. And looking for things like the performance out of the box, the thermals, the acoustics, in sort of just a really straight shooter sense. How does this card do against itself? And then we'll also look against the Founders Edition, which is a 2-slot card, much different in designs, dual flow through, doesn't use liquid metal for the 5080, so that's a big difference. And then it also has a difference in the vapor chamber heat piping structure for the 5080 FE. So that gives Zotac a little bit of a starting advantage in addition to its just thickness in general. Now, Zotac's website says the solid series is no frills, all action. I don't know what that means. It's a video card. The card also has, quote, a powerful cooling system, asterisk, available on select models. Good. That's good. We like uncertainty in products when they have hard specifications. The site also says this, quote, with a stealthier aesthetic and engineered for durability and performance, the Zotac Gaming Solid, all caps, is for those who demand pure performance over anything else, normal casing. So the card put points in stealth. Don't know what that means either. As for actual features, it has an LED that alerts users of improperly inserted 12-volt 2x6 connectors, a dual VBIOS switch, a partial flow-through area on the back here. It's actually one of the larger ones that they've done. The PCB cuts off right there, so that's not bad. And then it is using just that massive heatsink. Now, there's a lot of plastic on this card, unfortunately, including plastic at the back here at the PCIe expansion slot. Unfortunately, it's blocking some of the exhaust, although not a ton's gonna go there. As for where we got this one, we borrowed it. So we have this 5080 on loan from a system integrator. We're trying not to work with the board partners to the extent possible these days. That means buying them, ideally, or if there's no supply, we just buy entire pre-builds or borrow it from the pre-built manufacturers, I guess. That at least keeps us a little bit isolated from the board partners. But if you have cards, like 5090s especially, that you'd like to loan or just straight sell us, you can email us, because we're still looking for some to test, and we're just trying to buy them, basically, to go through the full customer experience. But anyway, all right, so now we're gonna tear down the Zotac 5080 Solid. And first of all, much larger than the FE cards. So the FE cards are 2 slots now. This ends up at over 3 slots. You can see the actual 3-slot bracket here. It's actually nice when they use a larger bracket to support the larger cards. It does help with the structural rigidity in the case. But the card itself, let's do a quick walk around. So if we look at the design overall, they're going with the 3 fans, sort of typical design with the exception of a somewhat large flow-through area. Now, unfortunately, Zotac has decided to block off, I don't know, about 20–25% of their flow-through. Not great. Big open holes here. That's good. But you can see the PCB does cut off here. It looks like there might be a thermal pad here. We'll find that pretty soon. And for the rest of the cards, pull the cable. So it comes with a 3 8-pin adapter to the 12-volt 2x6, which is right here. This, I don't know if this is like a Bentley grill or what, but this is interesting. So this is all plastic. It kind of looks metal, but that's plastic, unfortunately, and it is also more plastic than it is whole. Out the back, same situation where they've got this perforated, but then you look under it, and there's this just pieces of plastic and metal everywhere obstructing all of it. So despite all these holes being here, the holes are blocked immediately by plastic. Okay, so now we're gonna start getting into some of the more detail stuff. So we'll start with the fan size. These are about 90, these are gonna be 95s by the typical branding. The fans have that ring around the outside here, which is supposed to help direct the flow straight through a little more. So these 2 fans are going to go straight into the PCB the more traditional way. This is going to push some of its air out the back. First of all, looks like we're going to be taking out a bunch of screws through the back plate. Most of these go through the PCB as well, so it should kind of just pull apart really easily. And these are going to be like a Phillips, maybe 0. That's a 00, that's too small. There's thermal pads, that's good. So this is a metal backplate, this is aluminum. And one of our biggest complaints over the years has been when companies do aluminum backplates like this, and even though it's not finned, this one, unlike the FE cards where they actually fin the back cover, it is still a lot of surface area. I mean, it's a big sheet of aluminum, so it's good to make use of it. Over the years, depending on the card, we've seen anywhere from 0 degrees to, there was one instance where I saw 7 degrees by changing the backplate. Now in that instance, they used a plastic one that insulated everything. They're using relatively thick, so depending on the compression, that's a 2 to 2.5 millimeter thermal pad in terms of thickness. So this is contacting the back side of the memory. They are covering, if we look over here, all memory modules get cover on the back side. So we've got these 2, this group, and this group all getting contact. This is along what looks like part of the VRM. So that contacts over here where you can see the grease stain from it. This one is also contacting part of the VRM, also part of the back of the inductors. I'm gonna pull this one, but let's get into the part that matters. So we're gonna take this off. So PCIe backplate has 2 types of screws. These are Phillips 0, and this is a Phillips 1. And we're just using drivers from our toolkit. Also on the store, on store.gamersnexus.net. So the last 2 remaining screws are coming through the the front side. We'll go ahead and get that one in the bottom down here. And then the other one won't come out until we pull the PCB. The hope is that this just pulls. There's a cable here I'm going to remove early. Okay, cool. I was hoping the heatsink would come through with it, but I don't think it is, so we're going to have to take this off too. So this is the leaf spring. The 5080 die is a lot smaller than the 5090 die, and we're seeing that here. Yeah. And just need to check for fan cables so we don't snap them. You'll see over on this side there's 2 fan connectors, so we're going to need to disconnect those 2 before pulling it. These you always want to try and grip by the connector itself, not the wire. All right, cool. You can see I've got this this is just plastic here. This isn't like a rubber gasket. So this is uncommon. We didn't see that in past generations on NVIDIA cards. I don't have a strong opinion on it either way. The pads, so they've got the more clay-like pad. This is gonna, let's get the measurement. What's that say? Can you read it?
173.
Okay. So then it looks like that's a 2mm pad that was compressed down. That's covering the inductors. They have some fuses up here. So these, I guess, Zotac branded fuses. They've got 3 of them. From what I understand, based on talking with Buildroid years ago, if this information is still current, what he used to tell me is that these fuses won't act fast enough to actually save the card or protect it, but what they do is they allow the RMA center to identify where the failure happened, and then it opens up potential repair pathways. So those are not on every card. It's normally an added feature for board partners. This is what's interesting to me. I always focus on the thermal side. Very interesting from a design perspective here. This is a vapor chamber. You can see that here where it got sealed. So that's what that is down there. That immediately tells us it's a VC. And the memory is actually contacting a separate plate. So this plate directly contacts the memory modules, and then the plate itself contacts the vapor chamber. So like underneath this corner over here, it's going to be impossible to see, I think, but there's not full contact to the VC. It's just kind of floating in the air there. So maybe a little bit limited cooling capacity. For the heat pipes, they have a lot of smaller pipes. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is a lot. And these are, common sizes are 6 and 8 millimeters. So that's a 6. So they've got 7 6mm pipes that are going through. So for MOSFETs, inspecting what we looked at many years ago with Zotac, they are actually contacting the MOSFETs this time. That's great news. So you can see this pad was making contact. Pad on the opposite side was also making contact. So they've resolved that issue. That's good to see. It looks like we've got a piece down here that is actually going to be contacting this giant R10 inductor just below the connector. And then the connector, if we look at that, kind of interesting. So they're running, these are the sense lines, these pins here that are going down, that's the sense connectors. And then the power and ground's behind that back here. And then as far as shunts, there's actually, shunt resistors make a return. So I have not tried shorting shunts or piggyback modding for this generation, but you used to be able to do that to trick it into allowing you to pull more power and overclock it higher. Haven't tried that this time. I don't know why Zotac's always got to do something like this. Okay, yeah, these are actually, so these are this is fastened together with the fins somehow. I think this plate might be secured with adhesive. I'll leave that on there. For the rest of this, so to do a fan replacement or something, fan cables are these two. These are actually very accessible. You'd still have to pull it from the board, but not the hardest thing to do. And then there's just a couple of screws in there for the fans. So those are actually really easy to route if you have a fan die at some point. Let's just go ahead and clean that off. So, as expected, 45080, that's a GB203-400-A1. And the bottom line of text there. And that's a much smaller piece of silicon than the 5090. Huge difference in the size. So, that's going to be it for the teardown. We'll jump over to the rest of the video. I don't know if it's thermals or acoustics next, but we'll get into that. And as I'm standing here, we've done the testing for thermals, but I don't know how it performs yet. So the heatsink's very large. Hopefully it doesn't suck. Let's find out. We're getting to thermals at steady state now. We ran this prior to the teardown in order to preserve the card as is for testing. We tested both VBIOS options for thermals and frequency, and all the data you're about to see came from before the teardown. In a quick head-to-head, tested using the auto settings and whatever VBIOS told the card's fans and clocks to do, we landed on these results. The 5080 Founders Edition card ran at 32 dBA in our hemi-anechoic chamber and pulled 315 watts board power under this workload. Those variables put the GPU temperature at 65 degrees Celsius and memory at 72.8. And again, that's the 5080 FE. The 5090 ran a lot warmer. The Zotac 5080 Solid, tested with the same software and with auto conditions, ran at 31.1 dBA and 360 watts. The workload doesn't pin these to TDP, but it is consistent. The Zotac card runs a higher out-of-box power budget, and its higher clocks are pulling more power. Even with the higher power draw and marginally lower noise levels, the Zotac 5080 card manages lower temperatures than the FE. Considering the enormity of the Zotac card, although by previous standards it's just sort of average, but based on the FE card it is large, this is what we need to see. The 4-degree reduction in GPU and 7 to 8-degree reduction in memory thermals gives the Zotac Solid an advantage. Not in size, but the size is working in its favor here. That's exactly what we need to see. If it did anything else, then it would just instantly fail. This chart shows the frequency over the test pass. The FE card plotted around 2650 to 2680 megahertz on average, holding relatively stable under this test workload. For reference, the 5090 has a lower and spikier clock, the configuration is much larger, and the 5090 makes up for the difference in clocks in other ways. Adding the Zotac 5080 Solid to the chart, its clock is higher than the NVIDIA FE model, landing it at 2790 to 2842 megahertz. This is a pretty significant uplift. We'll test that in some performance scenarios momentarily in gaming to see what it actually does. The next chart is produced using our hemi-anechoic chamber that we built with support from our Patreon backers and our supporters on store.gamersnexus.net, which allows us to isolate noise and ensure a like-for-like testing environment day to day. This chart shows the 5090 Founders Edition and the Zotac 5080 Solid. The 5080 Founders Edition is mostly equivalent to the 5090 Founders Edition, with the exception that the fan curve runs slightly slower, and so the noise is reduced about 1 dBA in our workloads. But we're looking at the 5090 one here. The Zotac Solid doesn't encounter the same 180 Hz spike that we saw in both the 5090 and 5080 coolers. Remember, it's the same fans, the same cooler, with the exception of the liquid metal and the vapor chamber configuration, but it does have its own spike around 433 Hz for the Zotac Solid. The curve generally follows the same path, with marginally higher noise levels in the 1000 Hz to 1600 Hz range, but lower noise levels in most other places. The Zotac Solid overall manages to keep its noise levels down and avoids being obnoxious, so it is making use of its size. This is a really quick VBIOS comparison for the Zotac 5080 Solid. Between the two VBIOS options, by pressing that toggle, frequency is almost completely identical. There's really no meaningful difference here. For thermals, the silent VBIOS runs about 3 to 4 degrees warmer on the GPU from its reduced fan speeds. The fans run about 4 to 6 percentage points slower than the default VBIOS. The memory temperature climbs about 3 degrees. There's not a big impact to thermals from the VBIOS change, and the fans don't really change a whole lot either, just a couple percentage points here. We'll go through some quick gaming benchmarks just to look at the difference from the Zotac 5080 Solid out of the box in its default BIOS versus the FE model. This doesn't include the overclocking results, so we're just looking at the out-of-the-box results versus each other. In Resident Evil 4 at 4K, the RTX 5080 Solid ran at 128 FPS average and led the 5080 FE by 4.2%. It's not a bad uplift. It's more than we've seen in some past generations versus default partner models, but it is bad for almost $300 more money. Lows are within usual variants and benefited similarly. At 1440p, the 5080 Solid held 237 FPS average against the 5080 FE's 224. It's a kind of big lead, it's 6% better, and that is a large jump within the same GPU model. Again, the price isn't justified, but at least we're seeing an impact from the pre-overclock by Zotac. In Black Myth Wukong at 4K and ray traced with upscaling, we saw the 5080 solid at 60 FPS to the FE's 58.6. That's a 2.6% improvement. At 1080p and with RT and upscaling, the solid ran at 128 FPS average to the FE's 122. It's about a 5.5% improvement over the FE model. In Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail at 4K, we saw the 5080 solid at 117.5 FPS to the FE's 112.4. That's a 4.5% uplift. This trend repeats across the other games we tested. It's consistent, so we're going to stop here with the game benchmarks. They all tell the same story. So it's generally about 3 to 6% better. Overclocking has some bugs on the 50 series right now. We haven't dug too much into this bug, but it appears as if the voltage offset slider has an issue with 50 series at present. It reduces the GPU clocks when used. We ended up using 0 offset for voltage instead, but the NVIDIA voltage offset slider has always just basically added a tiny bit of boost at the very top end of performance anyway. This quick table shows the overclock stepping with 3D Mark Steel Nomad. From stock, we were able to hold an offset of 700 MHz core, which is huge, without a memory offset, and that landed us at 8160 points, and the uplift here is actually exciting. It's pretty insane. It was 28%. This wasn't replicated in any real-world use case that we tested, so check your expectations there. Sadly, we could not get a free 30% uplift in gaming, but we were able to get that in some of these synthetics. So anyone who's into competitive overclocking will at least have some fun with that. Adding memory clocks introduced instability without dropping the core offset to 650, so we did that. Unfortunately, we weren't able to use the 700 MHz offset with the memory offset. We also weren't able to find stability with these clocks in any gaming use case, so sadly, it was purely synthetic. It was mostly interesting, again, from just the fun of doing overclocking. But this next test gives you a real-world look. The next testing was done for a performance check. We want to really heavily emphasize that we didn't burn this in for stability. So this is not stable in all games we test. It was, however, stable in Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail at 4K. You'd have to spend time tuning it and dialing it in, but we wanted to present what we found so far. The stock 5080 FE ran at 112 FPS average here. The 5080 solid out of the box ran at 117.5 and without any background applications. We saw performance degradation when we began running Zotac's utility in the background in addition to changing the clocks and the fan speeds. We didn't dig into which of these was more responsible for it, but increasing the power offset and applying a 200 MHz core offset resulted in performance equalizing where otherwise it was worse when below that. We were able to run Final Fantasy's benchmark with stability up to a 500 MHz core offset and 1200 memory offset. However, we're not certain if there are any invisible background issues with this memory offset, especially outside of this game. The end result was a 125.7 FPS average, which led the stock Zotac solid result of 117.5 FPS average by 7%. It's really not a bad uplift. It's not that exciting, especially compared to Steel Nomad, but 7% is okay. The lead over the FE model is almost 12%. That's more meaningful. Overall, that's a decent amount of OC headroom from the base FE result, but the 7% uplift, sadly, is just typical for recent generations. It's not that exciting. In no real-world use case were we able to replicate the Steel Nomad uplift. That was exciting, though, if you're into that kind of competitive OC. Finally, here's the frequency chart in Final Fantasy. This isn't comparable to the earlier charts for frequency. Out of the box, the card ran at 2625 MHz in this game. Memory ran at 1875, but keep in mind that there's a multiplying effect for GDDR. The core after a 500 MHz offset ran at 3120 MHz, which is almost 1-to-1 as reported. The memory after offset ran at 2025. This is also about correct and what we'd expect after multiplying the numbers for GDDR effective speeds. There's a really important note here. We do the overclocking in these partner model reviews just because the power percent offset differs between them, and that's where the real advantage comes from. But the actual core offset, that's going to be more unit to unit, GPU to GPU, as in silicon variants. It's more of a silicon lottery thing. You shouldn't really count on most of these cards having any type of special binning. Sometimes that's done on the super high-end models, but generally speaking, it's kind of luck of the draw, and what we're really testing here is just what does that power offset give us for additional headroom, because it's mostly going to be power constrained. The Zotac 5080 solid, it's built well overall, so if you are going to buy a card, this particular one, we didn't have any massive red flags except for the price. And so if you don't care about that and you're like, I'm going to buy a 5080, I don't care what any of these reviewers say about the value, I just want to buy one of these cards, I need one of these cards, whatever the case may be, this card is fine with the exception of the price. So we didn't have any major complaints. Thermally, with the assembly, there's some oddities like the way this giant piece of plastic attaches to the shroud of the card. That was a bit different, but not really something that matters. And then thermally and acoustically, it was fine or good. The thermals, a little bit better than a Founders Edition, not as much better as they probably should be considering the thickness of the card. At least the memory was improved a decent amount. It was like 7 to 9 degrees, depending on how you tested it, stuff like that. Overclocking has some of the caveats we discussed, but it's like 2 to 5.5% better out of the box than the Founders Edition model, so you've got that. And then OC, it's got all the caveats that we sort of discussed earlier with testing as you go to make sure it's actually applying. MOSFET's contacted the thermal pads, so that was good. And otherwise, nothing hugely detrimental. So it's really just the value that's the huge killer here, because $1,000 for 5080, already huge killer. Very questionable as a purchase in general compared to some of the other options on the market, especially if you're okay with just using something for a while and letting things stabilize a little bit. But at least as a partner model, thermally, acoustically, they've mostly done their jobs. Now, what I really want to do is try and get some other 5080s in so we can compare the partner models against the partner models. Because right now, I don't have a barometer for how do these numbers we got out of this card compare to other partner models just against the FE. So keep that in mind. That means that in the comparative sense, we have limited ability to judge right now until we can get more in. And we'll see. They're hard to get. So if some of you want to sell us them or loan it to us, let us know. We won't reply to all those, but we'll reply to some of them. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, if you like this content, then check back regularly. We've got a lot more coming up, and we have some non-GPU stuff in the works right now, including a case. We're working on that Corsair case again. Otherwise, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus, throw us a few bucks every month to help us with our testing, or store.gamersnexus.net. We got things like our shirts. This one is on the store right now. Once again, not literally this one. That would be weird, but there are shirts with this design on the store. Or you can grab our mod mats, our toolkits, and our high heat resistant silicone soldering and project mats on store.gamersnexus.net, which directly helps support our testing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.